Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar on fundraising with Development Consultant Hallie Hobson. My name is Ariana Allen, and I'm the grant-making assistant at Dance NYC. I use she, they pronouns, and I am currently in Manhattan in Lenapehoking. I am a biracial, non-binary woman with curly, dark hair. I'm wearing a white shirt and brown glasses. Behind me is Dance NYC's pink and orange gradient background. ASL interpretation for this webinar is being provided by Liz Palladino and Jillian Deaton on behalf of Sign Nexus. Closed captioning is being provided by the Viscardi Center. Thank you for being here. A link to captions can be found in the chat. To pin our ASL interpreters, you can click on the dots in the top right corner of your video screen. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide small creative organizations with more information on fundraising strategies. Hallie will go over the key elements of strong fundraising, including the two most critical skills, relationship building and storytelling. The goal of today is to help fundraising feel a little more accessible to all of you. After going over a few guidelines, Maya will introduce you to our hosts and presenters. Next, we will hear from Hallie Hobson of HSH Consulting. And finally, we will field questions and answers from you. Dance NYC has muted all participants. Please submit questions when they occur to you using the chat feature. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end during the Q&A session. Please ask general questions, not questions specific to your organization or group. Please do not use the raise your hand feature. And now I'm going to pass it over to Dance NYC's grant-making manager, Maya Seuss, to lead us through a land acknowledgement and to introduce our presenters.
Thank you, Ariana, and hello, everyone. My name is Maya Seuss. I'm the grant-making manager here at Dance NYC. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently on Salt Spring Island off the west coast of Canada on unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Halkwi-Minum, and Sen-Chosen speaking peoples. I'm a middle-aged white woman with long, wavy dark hair and bangs. I'm wearing a white collared short sleeve top, thin gold rimmed glasses, and I have red-orange nails that I'll be flashing as I talk. Behind me is the bright pink fading to orange with Dance NYC's logo in white text. Before I introduce you to Hallie, let's deepen the roots of our work by reading Dance NYC's land acknowledgement, and we can take a moment to center ourselves in this space together. The practice of recognizing our country's violent history and its legacy in the space we occupy has been developed with the guidance of Indigenous dance artist and activist Emily Johnson and River Whittle to ensure that we embody this allyship. This includes taking actionable steps towards reparations in this initial instance by nurturing relationships with local Indigenous and First Nation artists and organizers. Dance NYC would like to acknowledge that the city of New York is located on stolen land, more specifically Lenapehoking, the traditional territory of the Lenape people, who are also recognized federally as Delaware Nation of Oklahoma in Anadarko, Oklahoma, Delaware Tribe of Indians in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians in Bowler, Wisconsin, and in Canada, the Munsee-Delaware Nation in Munsee, Ontario, Delaware Nation in Moraviantown, Ontario, the Delaware of Six Nations of the Grand River in Oswegan, Ontario. The Lenape people are the original inhabitants of this land and give Manhattan, its island, its name, Mannahatta. Dance NYC recognizes that as an organization based in NYC, we have benefited and continue to benefit from this systemic displacement and subsequent erasure of Lenape people and governance. Today, we are working to first ensure that we learn and research best practices for acknowledging the land we occupy. Second, move beyond acknowledgement and into needed reparation and equity. Dance NYC is committed to making concerted efforts to collaborate and make pathways for Lenape artists and leaders to return to Lenape Hoking today. To join us in this work, we encourage supporting Lene Lenape Exqueoc, a group of Lene Lenape matriarchs from 5 of the federally recognized tribes who are working to increase Lenape presence in Lenape land, both immediately and long term. And we'll drop their website into the chat. With this acknowledgement, we also name the legacies of the African slave trade, the current violence against migrant and immigrant communities, the disability rights and disability justice movements, and the LGBTQIA plus fight for queer and trans justice. We recognize that within each of us, history is present and future. With all of this in the room with us, let's take a collective moment of silence before we move into our content. Thank you. And now I'm very excited to introduce all of you to Hallie Hobson, who is founder of HSH Consulting and who will guide us through today's material. So Hallie is an incredible person to have with us today. She brings a wealth of experience and, as Ariana said, is here to help fundraising feel a little bit more accessible. Hallie contributes to the health and vitality of nonprofits by working with organizations to develop fundraising and patron engagement strategies, including capital campaigns, individual giving programs, board development, and so much more. Current and former clients of hers include the Ford Foundation, Friends of the High Line, the Laundromat Project, New York Community Trust, Public Art Fund, and that is just a few. Prior to launching her consultancy, Hallie served as the Deputy Director of Institutional Advancement for the Studio Museum in Harlem and led that organization's capital campaign. She was also at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she served as Deputy Chief Development Officer for Individual Giving, and the Senior Development Officer at the Museum of Modern Art. And in addition to all of her institutional and consultant work, Hallie is an accomplished poet and playwright. She holds an MFA in playwriting from UCLA and a BA in African American and Theater Studies from Yale University. So we are so thrilled to be able to introduce all of you to Hallie today, and I am just honored to be able to pass the mic over to you, Hallie.
Thank you so much, Maya, and good morning. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your schedule today to be with us for what we hope will be a productive fundraising conversation that demystifies it and makes it a little more manageable. I'm Hallie Hobson. I'm principal of HSH Consulting. I go by she, her, hers. I am an African-American woman of an indeterminate age, always eternally youthful. And I have box braids and they are pulled back. I'm wearing a blue and white striped shirt. We can go to the first slide. So this cartoon is a little dated, a little corny, but it always makes me laugh because the question is so wonderfully vague. And I clearly have no idea where to start. How much money do we need? And who might give it to us? And I can understand that that is often how fundraising conversations feel, especially in a complex and uncertain fundraising environment, when the pressure to find money wherever feels really real and relentless. But effective fundraising is not about chasing every dollar. It really is about being strategic and building a disciplined plan to reach the people already around your organization, those who know your work, participate in it, or have a reason to care, and giving them a clear and compelling way to deepen their involvement. I just hope for a moment, if you can drop in the chat, what is one word that is making fundraising feel hard? right now. Awkward. Okay, great. Individual giving, the vast mystery, uncertainty, competition, commitment. Interesting. Where is the money? Visibility, frustrating, shame, pestering. It's great. I'm sure. Please continue to add your comments to the chat. We're going to replace this slightly funny cartoon and its vague question with a more useful one today. How do we build the relationships and the case for support that will make giving possible? So if we go to the next slide, please. Again, today the goal is to make fundraising feel more manageable. There are a lot of like terms that development folks use. You are human, you know how to build relationships. So actually rest that you actually know how to do this work. But we are going to go on two particular capabilities that hold up in any fundraising climate and are essential to building an effective fundraising program. We're going to develop relationships and we're going to tell stories that help us understand why your work matters. These are not soft extras. And to me, this is actually the core point of any fundraising system. Next slide, please. I love this definition, which says fundraising is the gentle art of teaching the joy of giving. I love this definition because it moves us away from transaction and extraction and sometimes the feeling we have of begging or shame. I think that was mentioned earlier in the chat. Our job is not to talk someone into giving money away. Our job is to help someone recognize the joy, meaning, and agency that is available to them through philanthropy. That requires a true clarity about our work. And in addition, a curiosity about the people around your organization who have the potential to be more involved, including with their financial investment. Giving can meet a donor's desire for belonging, impact, expression, legacy, or civic participation. And fundraising becomes more ethical and more effective when the donor's aspirations genuinely overlap with your organization's needs. Lastly, no is not something to be daunted by. It is actually just more information that allows you to build greater alignment down the line. Next slide, please. So if folks will come off camera for a second, I don't know if people could see. I just want to do, it's a trick question. How many of you came into arts work because you loved asking people for money? Show of hands, or you can drop a yes, I love raising money, or a heart in the chat. I'm trying to look at some faces. No one, not even a single, a lot of head shaking. Okay. That is what I suspected. And even though I am a fundraiser, nobody wakes up in their cradle and says, gee, I'd really like to ask people for money for a living. But what is powerful is, and I know you all experience this, the excitement and agency of bringing cultural projects to light, of making something exist in the world that didn't exist, and of bringing your creative ideas to others who can enjoy them. I have had the privilege of learning the craft, I say, of fundraising at a number of institutions of varying scales, from MoMA and the Met to Meredith Monk, the House Foundation for the Arts, actually where I started my fundraising career. And you know, the scale can be different, the topic and focus can be different, but the fundamentals stay very consistent. Know who matters, listen well, keep good information, and make a clear case and follow through. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about what I think are two really essential skills, relationship development and storytelling. Relationship development answers who might care, what matters to them, and how do we build trust and partnership with them over time. And storytelling answers why this work, why now, and what becomes possible because it exists. Financial sustainability requires both. A great story without relationship may never reach the right person who can make those investments. And a warm relationship without a clear call to action gives that person no compelling reason to act. Next slide, please. Here's another truism I like. People invest in people and ideas that they believe. For a dance organization, that might be the choreographer's vision, a young person finding confidence, an elder who has found the joy in movement or regained balance, or a neighborhood or idea seeing itself reflected on stage. Our job as fundraisers, when we have our fundraising hat on, is to make all of those things human and civic, ideas tangible and visible. Now, simple, I also just want to add, does not mean easy. There is definitely a craft and a discipline, I would say, to building up your fundraising resources, repetition and consistency. Next slide, please. You can write down for yourself on a piece of paper or in the chat if you feel like sharing. What is one idea, not a program, but what is one idea that your organization invites people to believe in? Just be curious. What is the reason behind? What does your work in the world call people to do? What does it invite? What does it change for the better? Community, dances for everyone, mission and vision, preserving the culture, belonging, disability justice, anti-racist, yep, visibility. These are great. This is your overarching call to action that really is your why, your vision, and will help you start to build and find the elements for how you can more effectively communicate that and inspire your donors to become a part. Give me 1 second, just lost my. So once we know that idea, we need a disciplined and tangible way to move people closer to it. So I'm going to go through sort of the idea of the donor cultivation cycle. Again, we're humans, we're in relationship, we do this all the time. This is just a way to make it more intentional when you are doing it with the goal of raising resources for an organization. So the basic relationship cycle that many fundraisers work with is identify, qualify, cultivate, solicit, and steward. Again, put it in human language. We don't have to be stuck with these, but this is sort of the fundraising framework. Right now, it's written as a line. It is really a cyclical process, and many of the stages are iterative. The goal is not to race to the finish. The goal is to advance a relationship to a deepening point where there comes a moment where it feels appropriate to solicit some sort of involvement or support for your organization. For identification, the encouraging news, people are like, where do we start? Where do we get funders? You are in a wonderful position of having audience. So you already have people who in a very tangible way raise their hand and say, we're interested in the work. Once you have that sort of pool or audience and making sure you're collecting that data, you want to start to look at people who leans in a little bit more, who responds to a call to action, who doesn't miss a performance in the season, who asks you questions. You want to start to see the people around you who are indicating that they might want to be more involved. Qualification. Qualification is where we start to distinguish what type of potential this person might have in terms of their involvement or support of your organization, and how we rank them in our engagement and involvement. So yes, affinity is one qualification. Do they have an interest and a like in your work? Do they have the capacity to support. So if you have a large prospect who is a major gift prospect, that might require some more time and attention. If this is someone who's just going to go into an annual fund appeal, you might be able to rank the work and the involvement and engagement. Cultivation is the core part of this work. Cultivation is where you build understanding and trust through relevant activities, contacts, and engagement. I just want to emphasize, I feel a lot of organizations feel cultivation is a one-way street. Cultivation is a relationship and a two-way street. While you are teaching them, hopefully through compelling examples and meaningful experiences, why your work matters and what is important, you should also very much be listening to them to hear about clues about why they're interested, what motivates them, if they might be ready for an ask. So it really does become an actual relationship and two-way street, so that by the time you get to the solicitation, you already have meaningful insight that this is something that might be in their wheelhouse. It might be at the scale of their potential investment. So then we do then eventually get to the solicitation. And again, there are a couple of ideas around how to make that most impactful. I'll talk about that in a few moments. People may enter this through a variety of places. And again, the goal is not to rush through to the finish line, but it is to keep advancing the depth and tension of the relationship to get to a point where you might want to make an ask. I know many of you are smaller, independent organizations. You don't necessarily have the time, bandwidth, tools to develop a 50-person donor portfolio. But I think everyone can start small. Pick 5 relationships that you want to be more intentional with. Set a goal for those relationships, and make a monthly cadence or rhythm for how you're going to invest and advance those conversations. The other thing I always encourage my clients to do, if you have any kind of giving program and you're getting gifts through your website or you pass the bucket at the end of a performance, be curious about the people who are always donating. One of the first things I do when I get a giving list from a year-end appeal, I want to Google all those people. I want to know who they are. And I think that's a step that people often miss. You have to have a curiosity about the people who've already expressed this interest in your work. And so just, again, getting a little deeper, sending a personalized note of thanks, anything to start to open up that two-way street of communication where you can get additional information is super helpful. Next slide, please. So again, it's not magic, but it is discipline, it is focus. You want to start with the people who are already surrounding you and have demonstrated an interest and or love for your work. Again, you have the benefit of having audiences. I would also say, I think many of you probably get foundation support. Foundation support and individual support are cultivated in different ways. But I do believe you should think of your foundation program officers as constituents and think how within without harassing them or without going outside of propriety, you want to keep them up to date on things of interest before the grant period, before the application comes in, so that when you've done you know what they're interested in, you know where the foundation might have the most interest, that they've come to see your last season. So you're not just sort of going cold through the portal. So I think thinking about foundations is an important relationship as well. Board members and their networks. I know, again, I always say there are 3 G's to govern, give, get. That's a board member's job. And so if they are helping you solicit and open up their circles and exposing their friends and contacts to the work, that is a great way to expand and grow your networks. You also probably have the advantage of company members who have their own stories and ideas and relationship that can expand the definition of what it means to have impact and involved in your organization. Often the missed opportunity is not the lack of people, is not like who's going to give us this money. The people are in front of you. We just need to develop a way to capture them, engage and know more about them, and construct a next step in our engagement. Next slide, please. So Again, moves management is just another fancy development way to say developing the relationship. Again, it takes us through those steps. And the goal is by the time you get to the solicitation, it should make the eventual ask not feel like a surprise. It is a natural evolution of your conversation. And that is what helps it not feel so much like begging or hat in hand or shame. You are opening up an opportunity for someone to co-invest in making something in the world that you both want to see happen. Next slide, please. And again, you are human, you know how to build relationships, you do it every day. Moves management is just a way to be intentional. And we cultivate folks by creating meaning. So again, it's not a one-way street, it's not broadcasting. We want to make sure that we're in dialogue, that we're asking questions about them, what they got involved, what their philosophy around art or movement is, so that you can construct an ask that is truly relevant. And then once you've made your ask, how that ask goes is really the predication for how your future solicitations go. So you always want to think about immediate thanks, how you're going to steward them, how you're going to show them what their investment made possible, and how you're going to keep a positive engagement or experience so you can keep them in that circular donor cultivation cycle. Next slide, please. So again, I think you are in a really powerful place because you have so many tangible opportunities to invite your friends, audiences, donors, networks into deeper relationship with the work. You have rehearsals, there are artist conversations, studio visits, works in process, and defining the story behind making a creative voice. And just to note, I know people sometimes, oh, we don't have enough money for the Veuve Clicquot, or, you know, how it's really not about VIP treatment. It is really about creating an access point that creates deeper understanding and belonging. A couple of the ideas that you might want to explore. I often encourage, again, you're so busy. I know it's already a lot to produce the work. So as opposed to sort of developing a whole calendar of separate cultivation events, use what you have already in your calendar or your portfolio and build special moments around it. You could take a private rehearsal, but you could take a few snaps with the approval of the participants and share them with some donors. Hey, we're deep at work on this new project. I know you really enjoyed last season. We've got this neat work coming up, and I just wanted you to feel. I just came out of rehearsal yesterday. That makes someone feel very special that they're getting something that nobody else has seen. You could invite them for a coffee with the I'm going to say curators, with a choreographer to sort of talk about ideas. You can share a press review that has just come out that talks about your organization in a positive light, or illuminate some issues that you're grappling with or talking about. I think it's really important when you can to have the artists or the practitioners themselves involved in these conversations. But I think it's also important to make sure that you're briefing your participants and staff on the purpose of the interaction. They shouldn't be blindsided. As you're working with artists, you should not be revealing a piece of work before they're ready for it to be consumed. So it is important to be in dialogue with the creatives that you're working with, but also not surprise them with donor relationships. We don't ever want to make anyone feel ambushed or kind of put on show, and there should really be a development of discussion of strategy about how those things should unfold. The other thing I recommend to a lot of my clients is when you're meeting with a patron, have a list of 3 things you want to come away from that interaction or conversation knowing. That gives you a very tangible goal for knowing that the goal is to have a 2-way dialogue, that you should be curious about them, and you should come out of each interaction with additional information that you didn't know before. Just take a moment and think. You can drop it in the chat, or you can write it on a piece of paper for yourself. Think about maybe what you have coming up in the next 90 days. Is there a currently existing program or activity that you might be able to utilize in some sort of way to advance a donor relationship or conversation. Anyone want to be brave and drop something in the chat? Do you know that you have a conversation with some creatives? Do you have a rehearsal coming up? Are you scouting a new venue? Are you reading articles in the news or online about topics that you want to explore through your practice? Nice, awesome. Got open house, love it. Anyone without a facility who New Yorkers for that's a great, yep, dance party. Give me one more shared, then I'll. Yes, educational workshop residencies. That's a great opportunity. So really think how you can work smarter, not harder, where you don't have to sort of build a whole separate cultivation activity, but that you can utilize the activities that you're already doing and use those as strategic and consensual access points for donors and patrons that you want to be engaged with. Amazing, free concert. I love that. Next slide. So here are a few, I think, essential principles that really are going to make or break your success in starting to implement some of these strategies. Donor first, which again means we really want to be donor centric. We really want to think and get to understand what they want to accomplish through their giving, and then find where there are natural overlaps with the organization's need. Donor first is not donor controlled. You don't have to accept every single gift. You don't have to go along with curatorial ideas that a donor is developing. Your mission and your values will always remain the guardrails. But again, the idea is to have a conversation where you can present your actual institutional needs in a light that aligns with what you've discovered your donor has interest in. The second one is data is your friend. We could talk big picture about what that means. I understand everyone might not have a CRM or constituent or relationship management software program. If you say I said this, I'll deny it. If you need to start with Excel sheets, if you need to start with a list, I think the importance is to start capturing this data in a centralized place. And start making notes about how you're advancing these relationships. Some of it is just writing it down to be more intentional, to know that you've got 5 people that you're working with, that you want to engage, and that you're tracking those steps. The other thing I want to note is I've been surprised how many live performance organizations do not get their ticket buyer list or do not ask for their ticket buyer list. Again, you are in the lucky position, like a university, you have a natural audience or alumni pool, you have a natural pool. If you're not capturing that data and information, that's just one really obvious place to start. Yes, and I see the chat. There are a number of free CRM opportunities. So I think, again, the idea is not to over-engineer it just to start, but to start to get a way where you can capture the information. I do also think that fundraising is a little more fun. I think someone said it in the chat above, when it's a team sport. If you have a partner in a board member, or if you have a member of the company who actually likes having these types of conversation, even if you don't have a big outsourced fundraising team, I think it is helpful because it also extends the memory of the information. I think one of the advantages of also writing it down and having more than one person hold the relationship helps for leadership transitions and make sure that the relationship stays within the organization and not just with the one person who is cultivating that relationship. The other thing is different people respond better to different people. So if you have, again, a board member or a dancer or another member of the development team, you might figure out who is the right person to really advance that relationship. Like humans, we don't get along with everybody. So having some option to sort of figure out what the best way to work that relationship can be really helpful. And then the last one is love the ones you're with. It is development conventional wisdom that it is much easier and a better investment of time to retain the people who are already in your circle than to have to start from scratch and build brand new donors or investors. We want to be doing both, but the people who have raised their hand and made that first financial investment, made that recurring financial investment, are again the people who've demonstrated their interest. And we really want to make sure that we are taking care of those relationships so that we can keep them in our network in a very competitive environment and time. Next slide, please. So storytelling. I think this is actually one of the most powerful tools in fundraising, because it helps people feel an embodied understanding. As movement professionals, you understand what embodied. You want people to have an embodied understanding of the importance of your work and what their investment will make possible. Strong fundraising stories are not decoration, and they aren't just necessarily just narrative. Data, facts are also the important part of case building, because all of these things together reveal the stakes, the potential for agency, and the power of change, and the donor's possible role in all of these activities. Next slide, please. So many stories, so little time. I think that it's important for organizations to think about building what I call a story inventory. Maybe you have a document or a list of stories that really express something essential about the work that you're doing. There are a couple of categories that you might want to think about these storytelling elements: your people, your vision, your approach, and your history. A people story has the power to make the impact, again, embodied, felt, and human. A vision story helps you illustrate the future that your being in the world, that your art and artistry being in the world helps create. An approach story explains what is distinctive about how your particular organization works. And a history story demonstrates your continuity, resilience, and earned trust. You have so many opportunities. Who are your dancers, for example? Feature them. What brought them to this work? What brought them to your company? Why do they still do it? Is it a full-time job for them? How are they piecing together a life? I think people are very interested in how artists build a life. People understand, think narrative, beginning, middle, end, and they understand transformation. And the more you can illustrate those powerful journeys across your program, the more connected people will be to your work. I think also board members' story, if you do have an active board, helping them tell their story more effectively. Why did they agree to basically become unpaid or workers that pay often, if they're doing it right, to support your organization? That's a big investment. Why did they agree to do that? And they probably have a powerful story that would unlock a connection for others. I think also donors really like to see the evolution of things. I think sometimes we're really trained, obviously, as artists to show the best and most developed and the final powerful work. But as you think about how comfortable you can be showing bits of process, I find that people, particularly if they are not artists themselves, are very interested in how art comes together. I think it's very inscrutable and mysterious to folks. So if you can find moments that you and your team are comfortable sharing about what are these pivotal moments, what is the idea of lightning or inspiration, how does that come together? Those can be really powerful ways to illustrate the importance of the work. Next slide, please. So I do want to say data. When I say story, and I should probably say case building, but I do think it is also storytelling. But let's think about how we can show, not tell, and make tangible the impact of the work you're doing. Data is very helpful. It gives donors and foundations and others the ability to track information. I think there are a couple of ways that you can think about it. Outputs tell us what we did, just the facts, ma'am. Classes taught, performances staged, audience numbers. Outcomes tell us what changed. Confidence increased, isolation decreased, professional skills grew, neighborhood experienced greater connection. Donor need both. And again, I think linking them together allows you to do the more powerful storytelling. We don't want to overclaim causality, so let's be careful. But you can still say participants reported or we observed if you don't have the mechanism to get more in-depth data. I would say that it's important for organizations to just think of 2 or 3 measures that you might be able to collect consistently. Again, you might not have a 30-person development or visitor services department. You just need to think, what are the 3 to 5 things that we can record consistently over time? Because I think the other power in stories is not just the data from this year, but it's showing the progress. The audience has increased. We did more dances, or we were able to do more weeks of rehearsal. What are some of those things that you can track that help you tell the power of the work you do? And I think the other principle is, sometimes the grant report is due and you got to scramble and pull all the data at once. If you can make collecting numbers and feedback as a part of your regular practice, it'll leave you in better stead when you actually have to report out or make a case. Next slide, please. So here's an example, made up example, which I'll just walk you through. But a choreographer, Elena, spent 4 months thinking about an idea that refused to come together, but was really fascinated by this topic and wanted to figure out how to express it through movement. It's hard staring that open dance floor, that blank page. This is the terror and horror of making work, at trying to bring a creative. How can you bring that process to light? What was something that opened up and empowered her? Was it the way the light fell through the studio that moment? Was it another dancer who was entering into an improvisation? Was it someone who said, no, that's terrible, and she had to scrap it and start all again? But I think, again, this idea of giving insight into the actual narrative process is a very powerful tool. And here's the turn and where we connect it back to the money. Yes, we need money for sets and costumes and to, launch our New York premiere. But often what donors are supporting is that invisible work. What is it to support an artist? What is it to support the creative process? And you are giving the artist back that time to make that reality possible. And then you can connect your specific ask, your specific number back into what is helping you to advance this work. So this is one made up example, but I think, again, thinking about how to unpack what actually happens behind the scenes, not only showing the final product. I do think people who want to get involved in your work want a sort of deeper understanding of what it means to create and bring work to light. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk you through, you're getting a super secret bonus. And it's not rocket science, but it is a formula that has worked for a number of organizations that I have worked with. I think most people probably do a year-end appeal. I recommend, if possible, if you can do both a year-end and a fiscal year-end, so you're doing it twice a year, is a good habit to get into, especially if you're doing it online and you have an automated process. I think one of the, I would say, mistakes or maybe not as strategic approaches that people take to year-end appeal is what I call sort of the poo-poo platter of ideas. It's just this sort of general inventory. In the last 12 months, we did this, we served this, we went to 18 places, we did that. I think the human brain, particularly at year end, when a lot of people are asking for money, it that doesn't reveal something to folks. I think it is important to treat your year end appeal as a storytelling opportunity that expands the aperture into the work you're doing. So, as opposed to going broad and doing the sort of list, what you're going to do is you're going to pick an aspect of your work and your program, and you're going to go deep into that over the course of usually can be anywhere from 6 to 12 week campaign, depending on your capacity. I'm going to outline it for you briefly, but I think it is a really great exercise to start to explore what parts of your mission can you open up and what parts, and then see what is most resonant with audiences around you. So typically there is a thank you email, no solicitation, that comes the week before Thanksgiving, maybe the Tuesday or Wednesday before Thanksgiving. This is, it could be a dancer, it could be a participant. It's lovely to be from a voice outside your organization, saying thank you for something that you provided or make happen. Then when we get to the core of the appeal, the core appeal is a lead letter. If you also do paper mailing, snail mailing, it's a hard copy and your email letter. It should be from someone who is obviously outside your typical community. You want someone who represents a voice that gives you access to audiences beyond your, yes, we already know and love. Sometimes it could be a high profile alumni who has greater visibility and still thinks to the support importance. It could be a donor that you've found that is prominent in banking or another business field, but constantly invest and support, and you want to highlight their investment. When you can sort of think about someone who will open you up to other audiences, that is a great place for that lead letter. The lead letter should be concise, heartfelt. We usually draft them for the person, but then they can put their own spin on it. The other piece is the email versions of these are very visually driven. So if you can have really compelling images, I love to feature images that aren't static headshots. I love to see people in motion, to see people at your facility, in the audience after a performance, things again that are really surprising images that compel invitation. That email/letter usually goes out the Monday after Thanksgiving. Then on Giving Tuesday, we have what we call the false forward email, which is usually the executive director or the lead person at the organization forwards the email from your high profile person and says, did you see the message from our dear friend X? Gives you opportunity to highlight that first email again. The executive director letter gives you an opportunity to do any business of the campaign. If you have secured a matching grant, if you have a target number of participants that you're aiming for. So the lead letter can both acknowledge the person who is sent the lead letter. It can do any administrative business related to the campaign. And lastly, it should introduce the theme that you will be highlighting through the rest of the appeal. Over the coming weeks, and again, this formula can be contracted or expanded depending on your capacity, but we try to do 2 to 4 stories once a week that highlight whatever element of your program or your organization that you've decided to highlight. It could be performers and their shoes. You could do a portrait of your dancers and their like worn out jazz slippers or about like, and you could say, here's a portrait. We go through this because we have over 100 hours of rehearsal every month, and this is the wear and tear that we do on shoes. The idea is to, again, pick an element of program, pick a person who can express that and tell that in a personal story, and then tie it back to the greater purpose of your organization. It's also important to have strong visual assets that will drive the email. Then coming to the home stretch, then the Tuesday or Wednesday before New Year's, there's usually a sort of follow-up email. It could be from the executive director again. Sometimes it's from a board member, or sometimes if you have a development lead, it's from the development lead. That is usually called, you have 24 hours left to give this fiscal year. You can update them on progress of the appeal so far. We've done so well. We're just a few dollars away or a few participants away from our goal. You can note anything that happened over the holidays. You can do a quick recap of the emails and the messaging that you shared. But that's your sort of last drive to get those last 36, 24 hours worth of gifts in before the new year changes. And then finally, we do a thank you appeal at the top of the new year. And that is usually a picture of all of your staff, whatever that means, but the people who actually make the work happen. So we usually lead with a strong, during pandemic, it was great. We just used picture of the Zoom screen, which was very novel at first, and people held up signs that said thank you. But if you have a staff outing or party, it's a great time every year to capture that picture that will then serve as your thank you. And then you can also give them, we can't wait to see you next year or this year. The first event is going to be XYZ. We'd love to have a coffee with you so you can hear more about our work. So I went through all of that again because I think most people do a year-end appeal of some kind. And I think thinking through this framework, which again can be contracted or expanded depending on how you want to approach things, is a great way to start to train you about the detail of storytelling, to not always default to the sort of poo-poo platter, big summary of activity that I think sometimes washes over donors' heads, and give them a really tangible, powerful, detailed story that makes your work and elements of the work really tangible and impactful. So thank you for letting me walk you through that. We'll go to the next slide, please. Again, you're already doing the work. You're in the arts because you have something to say. You are already masterful storytellers. Every rehearsal begins with experimentation. Every performance creates emotion or perspective. Choreographers are already communicating through narrative, movement, memory, feeling. Fundraising is the act of translating that artistic language for someone who wasn't in the room and making them understand the fullness of what it takes to make that possible. Next slide, please. We will be sharing the deck after. I'm going to pause in a minute and we can open it up for questions. But I did, and I think there is a sort of bigger Dance NYC resource center, so we can make sure these details are saved there. There are a number of consultants that I know that work with smaller scale organizations and can be very helpful as you think through your fundraising strategies. A couple of books that have been of interest to folks. And of course, there's some major online fundraising resources that you may be familiar with, but these are great places for resources, classes, and other information. So with that said, I'm gonna pause and maybe we should take the slides down. I can see those who are on screen and we can start to open up for questions. Ariana, how would you, Maya?
I'm just going to wait. Here we are. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Hallie. Maya Seuss here again, Dance NYC's grant making manager. So we're going to move into the question and answer questions and answers. That's how we go here, the Q&A portion of the webinar. You are welcome to unmute yourself. If you do, please keep your question brief and start by saying your name and give us a brief visual description of yourself before asking your question. Otherwise, feel free to submit any questions using the chat feature, and we will be reading those out. And we'll give a little space for conversation and for Hallie to be able to respond to some of the questions. We also ask that you just keep your questions general about fundraising and not very specific things that are about your organization. Of course, those things relate. So I'm going to just drop down here to see if we have any questions so far. And so one question was somebody was asking if you had an opinion, Hallie, about the saying, quote, if you want money, ask for advice, and if you want advice, ask for money. Do you have an opinion on that comment, on that saying?
That's very funny. I think the asking for advice is definitely a good strategy for relationship building, which can be on the road to getting money. I think if you sit down on the table and automatically ask somebody for $10 or $100,000 or whatever it is, you haven't invested in the relationship building. And asking for insight or advice is a great way to start a conversation with a patron or a donor. So, hey, we're thinking about the New York season. I know you came to BAM last year. Like, what are you thinking? That is a generative way of opening up a conversation. And if they say, I think you should really be here. I'm so, have a relationship at, the Hallie Hobson Theater of Dance Arts. That's great. We were actually thinking the same thing too. Can I do some more research and come back to you? Would you help us support that? A seed investment. So I think again, the advice thing is a great strategy for relationship building generally. I think yes, donors sometimes, particularly sophisticated donors, I always say they give you a no thank you gift, right? So maybe you're asking advice, they can see where the thing is going and they don't want to go in the whole engagement. So they just say, you know what, here's $10, here's $1,000, go with God. That's okay too. Again, I think the other thing when you really kind of get into the humanness of relationship building and connecting, a no is okay, right? Everyone, a no is maybe it's not personal. They have other things going on. It is just additional information that you can move forward. Thank you so much for considering. I really appreciate this right now. I might want to circle back to you a year from now and see where you are, but I hope we'll see you at next performance. A no is okay. It is data.
Amazing, thank you. Heather, did you have a question and then you wrote it in there? I'm welcome. I'm happy to read it out, but if you would like to unmute you and ask it directly, you're welcome to do so.
Sure.
Just give a brief.
I'm Heather Robles. I am a light-skinned cis woman of indigenous Mexican descent on Lenape-Hoking, and I have short brown hair, tank top. So my question is, I'll just read it because it's short. When you have a board that has sunk into a culture of saying, I'm not fundraising. I'm not doing that. I'm not a fundraising board member. I don't do that. How can you change the culture of that board and utilize that person or members like that by inviting them to do something? And if so, like what, that they are willing to do?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. And I have a whole philosophy about how the field is changing, which I won't bore you with now because I think we have 29 minutes left. But I will say first, and this might be too late. I know we inherit board members sometimes. I think it is very important when you're onboarding board members to be very clear about what the expectations are. I work with a lot of organizations that maybe members have been recruited for various reasons and at different times where they've been told you don't have to do this. My very biased opinion as a fundraiser is that a board has 3 jobs: govern, give, get. And if you're not giving and you're not getting, that's 2/3 of your job you're not doing. That's my, very fundraiser biased opinion. There are obviously different skill sets and involvements, and I think everyone can do it at their scale and at their ability. But I think to allow people to abdicate that responsibility is not good for the organization. However, I know that there are many, many organizations that have boards in varying levels of engagement and activity. I think board culture change is a longer term project. Um, and um, and should be one of the things that maybe is led from inside. I think one of the powerful things is kind of hard for staff members or the choreographer or artistic director to kind of not nag, doing what you're supposed to do. But if you have a board member who does believe and does understand what the board culture should really be, they can help have that peer-to-peer conversation to help move that person forward into a more productive um, space. But I think the broader idea of changing culture is kind of a big initiative in some ways. And I think it starts with resetting expectations. And I often just go back to a very neutral definition of what it is to be a trustee and maybe ask them, how are we, if you have an annual report card or you do it in a one-on-one or you let the executive committee take that on, how are we doing at the things state of New York says we have to do? Or at the 3 Gs, how would we rate ourselves? And then sometimes you can unlock a more embodied epiphany so that people can make the change happen. And it's not just us pestering folks, but this is a problem across the field. And it's definitely worth paying attention to and perhaps building a broader strategy to get your board in more alignment with what the organization needs at that time.
Thank you. We have some excellent questions in the chat here. I'm going to read. The first one is, do you have any specific advice if an artist or company has been on hiatus? So I imagine that's sort of like how to tell the story or how to approach people coming back online.
Absolutely. I think this goes back to, I always sort of think about a reverse rollout of information. I know a lot of people say, oh, we got an article in the Times or whatever, making stuff up. We can't wait to forward it after. When I think about engaging those constituents closest to me, I want to, again, within reason and discretion, I want to give them advance news. So what I might do is, say you're relaunching or coming back online in September, I might spend the summer. Who are those key relationships and people you need to have those conversations with now? So you can say, hey, I wanted to talk to you first. Can we have a cup of coffee? Or we're going to do a little Zoom orientation. But I want to talk to my former board members, my largest past supporters and donors, people. Hey, I want to tell you, we took 2 years off. It was a really important moment for us the work was so important, but the organizational structure really needed some revisioning. And we took the time, we sat down, and we really have a vision about how we're going forward. What do you think about that? Could you be support? So it is one of those advice seeking, but I would go to your early people first. By the time you do the email blast or you have the article in the Times, that's marketing, that's general knowledge. That's not fundraising, relationship development. Both have their purposes, but I would just always think about what is that smaller rollout where you're actually both informing, but also having a dialogue about getting some feedback, starting to get the vibe and understand what questions you may need to answer. I think that is a really good way to do it, so that by the time you relaunched or started or the new season is up, you already have a core set of constituents who can advocate for you, who may be supporting you financially, emotionally, otherwise, and are going to help you build that momentum as you build towards the new thing.
The next two questions are related, but they are, and they're related to each other and also slightly related to what you just said. So I feel like you can kind of build on that. But the first one is, how do you get the ball rolling? So it seems like many funders want a history of funding, but how do newer organizations navigate this initial ask when first getting going? And then I'm going to read the second question, which is, how do you initiate relationships with donors that you don't have a previous relationship with? Email invites seem to fall flat. So those, how do we really start to cultivate when you're starting afresh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, one, it's the people around you. So if you've just started with the idea and you've assembled, talk to your friends, the people you've been talking to this idea about, many years. Talk to the people who are involved. Like, again, I typically find that the most organic and most effective way, you don't want to Google richest people interested in dance. That is not necessarily helpful. You want to start with the people who know you, who believe in the ideas. And again, as you have presentations, hey, everybody invite 5 friends who you think might like. I know it sounds very grassroots, but that is literally how you start. And the people say yes are the people you can start to engage around that. I think to the question of how to get started maybe without a track record, I think for foundations in particular, but I think also individuals, they want to know that their investment will be stewarded well. And so I think there are some things you can do to help signal that while new, you have thought through some of the business implications of what this money would do for your organization. One, if you need a fiscal sponsor, having that in place, knowing how all of that would happen. I think the other idea is I encourage organization. We are creatives. We are making art exist in the world, but, and this might not apply to the emerging, but if you have staff and have to file 990, and you are an organization. And so an organization, nonprofit or not, has to have a sustainable operating framework and a business plan that works. And so to be able to understand that for yourself, which I think is just important when leading an organization, and articulate that to your funders, gives confidence that they are not just sending money into the void, that you understand how this money will happen, how you will replenish it next year if it doesn't come through. Again, some of these sophisticated questions. I think for if you're really starting out, and this may be your first round of grants with a foundation, or I think getting signals of that people are interested and supporting is really helpful. So it could be our first audiences sold out every year. So you're demonstrating the public interest and appetite. We have an advisory board of people who are deeply connected and emerged in the community. There are signals that sometimes communicate, okay, like this is serious. We've got some signals that this didn't just come out of the ground in a blink of an eye, that there's been some thought and resourcing around this, and we're gonna take a chance and make this first investment.
Thank you. Another question.
Can I add one more thing? I'm so sorry.
Of course.
I forgot the second part of the question. In terms of opening the conversation, say you have your audience list, you're looking at it, you're like, how do I open a conversation with one of these donors? I find personalized communication is important. So as opposed to maybe, and again, I don't know how people are approaching this, as opposed to like a paperless post or an Evite, a direct correspondence that cites specific things that person, hi, I see you were a ticket holder at the Joyce season and you came to and we're just reaching out to say thank you so much. If we don't have audiences, we can't do this work. I would love to have a cup of coffee or a quick Zoom with you. We're interested in what made you say yes to this performance. So I think, again, it's a sales technique too. The more specific you can be in your outreach, the more likely, even if it's a no thank you, the more likely I think you are to get a response.
Thank you. I'm going to actually, there's 2 questions I have here. I'm going to jump to the second one just because it's still in this theme, and then I promise I will ask the other one about breaking down production costs and so forth. So this question says, several foundations do not take unsolicited requests and are often invite only. What are some best practices to expand your organizational networks to these funders, i.e. get on their radar, and to plant seeds to get invited to more foundation applications or to apply for that. Is it really just case by case?
Yeah. Um, Foundations have their own specific guidelines, rules. Some of them are, yeah, they're closed or they don't take applications. The way I think about that, and again, I'm trying to think. I know there are many scale of organizations represented, so I'm trying to think about that. Um, but what I do is I will look at the foundation, I will look at the board list, and I will look at the other donors. I think often, so one, board to board communication. And again, this is where relationships matter. Maybe your board member sits on a board with one of those people, or is it, and often, and again, you have to tread, you want to be respectful and not pushy, but it could be, hi, I serve on XYZ board. I know that the foundation doesn't, receive requests, but I'd be curious if I could have a little coffee with you or have a minute to tell you why this organization is so important. I think we've got some things that are coming up, and we'd love to see if it's appropriate to be on the foundation's radar. A board member can do that to another board member. You can't really do it as a staffer. Like there's a power imbalance there. The other way is if you are getting support from a foundation, you might ask them. They believe in the work they're investing. Hey, there are a couple other foundations that we really think would vibe with our work. Is there an introduction you can make? Again, they might say no. Again, they have to be strategic with their relationship. But if you give them a list of five, they might say, you know what, I do know program officer so and so. I know they're giving money in this area, and yes, I would be happy to set up a site visit. So those are two key ways, I think, board to board inquiries, and then also if you have somebody already in the foundation community that could then make a recommendation to a peer, that could also be a way to open up those conversations. But generally, I think, again, be strategic. If you see other companies, or again, and everyone's protecting their resources, but it might be like this only happened because, or actually they do refresh their list every 3 years, and it's good for you to get in the conversation now. If you can get a little more intel on why it is invite only and if there is even an opportunity, that could also be useful to you.
So just to clarify, also you were kind of getting at possibly looking at who's been funded by that foundation already and getting some intel from your peer organizations and sort of say, how did you get these funds? How did this come about for you? And then that might open up some doors that you could walk through.
Absolutely.
That, okay. Okay, so one more question here we have. Under what circumstances does breaking down production costs, i.e. pay, rehearsal costs, staging costs, etc., help secure or deepen donor relationships? And then somebody added, yes, this is a question, and how much do you reveal? So I guess it's sort of like how transparent are you, and when does actually breaking down those costs and showing what things really cost for your program, under what circumstance do you do that, and does this help secure or deepen donor relationships?
Yeah, excellent question. A little challenging for me to reply in the abstract, but I will say that broadly, donors, be the foundation, individual, other, need a logical narrative of what you're making happen, and that the ask amount, it should all make sense. In some way, one of the ways of making sense is making sure you have a grasp on the cost of what you're asking for. Look, I think most people know the most valuable dollar is an unrestricted dollar, a dollar that the organization can decide what it wants to do with. And I'm always encouraging organizations to use the specificity of their work, their season, the program as a hook, but having ultimately the ask be for general operations. It doesn't always work, but I think donors are understanding more and more that these are the dollars that we're lacking. Foundations, I think, will give you clues. They might have a budget template. They might have very specific requirements about how they want you to present your financial need. I think they are looking for, again, do the costs make sense, right? Like, do you have experience? Have you thought this through? I think they're like, can you raise all the money? Is the other thing. Many, if they're not doing full support, they're doing project support. They want to know that you have other ideas or other thoughts. How are you going to fully resource this project? Um, yeah, things like that. So in foundations, usually I think they're very specific about what they want to see on the budget template. Um, I don't think they need to know the type of lavalier you're gonna use, like unless it's like a technical grant. But I think the general idea is that I know this, it should make sense that the costs are proportionate to the work, that you have an idea where the rest of the funds are coming from, and so that they can have confidence that the investment will be used appropriately. Um, the other thing is I do encourage organizations. I don't know if this is controversial, but I think there is your operating budget and what you've told the board that you're going to spend. Grant budgets to me are a separate document. They are aspirational. You are telling the foundation, if I had the resources to do this right, within reason, this is what it costs. And so, yeah, I think it's important. I know people who just like pull it straight out of, QuickBooks or whatever, but actually, this should be the idea of what it is to fully realize this within reason, so that when you get that dollar amount, and usually the funder is not going to grant the whole thing, then you can sort of figure out how you're going to adjust the work to match the resources that you're ultimately able to bring in. So I think that's just another thing about thinking about budgets. And if you're doing a project budget and they allow overhead or arts administration, put it in there. And sometimes they even make the case. I think I know you say you couldn't have it, but 10% towards this, because the people, for most organizations, the staff and the people to do the work is the highest cost. So you should be allocating some of that to your project.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's all the questions we have in the chat. I'll just open up for one moment in case anybody else would like to come off mic and ask a final question to Hallie. We just have a comment that Jason Samuel Smith once told Brenda, don't ever miss the chance to ask for the sky.
100%.
No, but I'm here. Raquel Dutois, Latina, she, they. I middle age as well as Holly, and I just want to say thank you so much for sharing this. I am glad that the field gets to hear a little bit of your wisdom. I have personally learned from you many years of looking at those spreadsheets, and so I just want to just do a shout out that you really make fundraise the fun out of fundraising. So thank you so much.
Highest compliment, and so grateful for the invitation from Raquel, Maya, the rest of the dance team. It is a great pleasure. I love to geek out and talk about fundraising because it really is about making beauty or making meaning in the world. So I think if you can keep that as the background, it all gets a little less scary.
And there's a question here that just says, do you have a website where folks can sign up for a newsletter? Is there a way that people can contact you?
I am what's called a very boutique firm. So it's just me, and I don't have a website, but I am on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to take connections via LinkedIn, keep you posted. And I am planning on building out the website for next year.
Amazing. So Hallie Hobson, HSH Consulting. And I just want to echo what Raquel said. Thank you so much for being here. It's been such a wonderful joy working with you, and I know you've given so much to the field today. We're just going to close out. I'm going to pass it back over to Ariana to give us our last little moment. And otherwise, we will see you all in New York City at all of our amazing arts events. And thank you for being in community with all of us.
Thank you, Maya. If we haven't answered your questions, we have extensive resources about fundraising on the Dance NYC website. Thank you for tuning in to Dance NYC's webinar on fundraising. Thank you, Hallie, for sharing your experience and knowledge with us. And thank you again to our ASL interpreters from SignNexus and our closed captioning providers at the Viscardi Center. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Thank you.